I have given a name to my pain. The Batman.
Always waiting for some Batman to save you.
It's simple. We kill the Batman of Gotham.
You don't really think you'll win, do you? I'm Batman.
Hello and welcome to episode 107 of the Batman on Film podcast. BOF is the sponsor as well as a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network. Check out all the shows over at batmanpodcastnetwork.com. If you're listening to us on iTunes, if you take the time to rate and review the show, we will read it on the air. And Batman on Film is now on Patreon. If you like what we do here at BOF, whether it's the podcasts, the new vlogs, or the website itself, and you want to help support us if you're so inclined, please head over to patreon.com/BatmanOnFilm for all the details. I am the host of today's podcast, Ryan Haas, and I have two people joining the panel today. The first of which is Rob Myers, who is the host of the Rob and Everyone Loves the Drake podcast. How are you doing, Rob?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on the show to guest.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is an exciting day. And for our second guy on the panel, we have someone making his Batman on Film podcast debut. You will be hearing a lot more from him in the future because very soon I'll be launching the An Azrael Agent of the Bat podcast. That's all about, the Azrael character. And this guy is going to be my co-host, so I'd like to welcome my good friend Matt Whaley on the show. What's up, sir?
Not a whole lot, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm really excited about today's episode. 2018 is a big year for Batman on Film, the website, the podcast, everything. It's the site's 20th anniversary, and last year we hit 100 episodes of this podcast, and this year we're trying to branch out a little bit more and do some cool things with the show to expand the content and how we cover it. So I'm a big fan of the DC Universe animated movies. I know you guys are too. And me and Bill, who runs the site, and a bunch of us, would from time to time reach out to people on Twitter, like James Tucker, who produces some of those movies. And we would ask him, we really love these movies, but wouldn't it be awesome if you guys could adapt Gotham by Gaslight? Because that's one of our favorite, Elseworlds type of Batman stories. And, James Tucker responded a few times and he said it was always one of his favorites and that it was on a list of things that he'd like to see as well. So after a few years of just blind hope, it actually finally got announced and we were super excited about it. So that's when I immediately jumped on the idea of we should totally go and see if we could get Brian Augustyn on the show, who wrote Gotham by Gaslight, because it would be great to just pick his brain on, his career and Batman and everything before this film comes out, and it would be just a great episode. So that's exactly what we're doing today. So I'm pleased to welcome Brian Augustyn on the show. How are you doing?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm super excited about this. So, before we get into Batman talk, I'd like for you to just kind of take us through your career a little bit, like how you broke into the industry and how it led to some of the things you've gotten to do, over the years, like writing and editing. I know you've done a lot over your career. I know it's a lot to get through, but just kind of,
Sure, I can give you
I'd like to hear some of that
compact version. I've been a comic fan since I bought my first comic a good 30 years before you guys were born. Back in the Silver Age, I guess, and frankly fell in love with mostly DC comics. So those were the ones that were most available at the drugstore where I discovered them, and Batman and Flash and Justice League and Green Lantern and all that. Never dreaming at that time that I would have anything ever to do with them. I wanted to be a cartoonist. Discovered I am only mildly able. Went to art school though. But somewhere in the early 80s, I got involved with what was about to become the, what do they call it? The black and white independent comics boom. This is right about the time of, the Ninja Turtles debut. And roughly the same time, I got involved with doing some editing and writing with a single little comic out of Chicago called Troll Lords, and worked with a couple of guys who created the book. And we all got noticed. I was also in Chicago, so First Comics, you may have heard of, was there. And through conventions, I knew a lot of the folks there. So I sort of, did some practice stuff with them, submission pile review, anything to get near comics. So having discovered I wasn't ever going to draw them, but that when I drew my inept early comics, I also wrote the stories. I parlayed that into pitching stories to Now and to other places. Mike Gold, who was one of the founders and the editor-in-chief at Now, got lured to DC to become a developmental editor. And shortly thereafter, he offered me a job, and I moved east from Chicago to New York area. So 87, I started. I was an associate. I quickly graduated because I took on a workload. I was an editor there first, and edited a bunch of stuff that things like El Diablo and a handful of startups, and then managed to get my hands on Flash, which was the dream. I wanted to be Julius Schwartz, who was my editorial idol when I was a kid and growing up, and so I got to do the Flash, and that was an amazing thing. And I edited that from, I don't know, about number 27 or something of the new, the Wally West Flash, and stayed on it one way or the other, editor and then co-writer and writer, all the way to like 160 or something like that. So it was more like
over 10 years or something.
88 to 96. So it's about 8 years. One way or the other. Actually, I think it went a little longer than that. So it might be almost 10 years. Worked with Mark Waid. I discovered this waif who was desperate for work, and I hired him, made him into the giant he is today. All 5'6" of that giant, and I'm probably lying. 5'8" maybe. Anyway, and then we were already great friends, and I decided with little kids at home that I wanted to spend more time at home. And I became a freelancer, and with Mark, we co-wrote Flash and co-wrote a few other things like JLA Year One. I had also edited Justice League before I went freelance, another Schwartz, milestone. For 10 years, I got to play with all of those toys, and then I became a full-time writer and, invented some toys of my own, wrote Crimson with Humberto Ramos. And then he and I later created a book called Out There. And since I started writing, I've written for all of the companies. Those were Wildstorm books. I've written various things for Dark Horse, for a company called Dreamwave out of Canada. I've written with I now live in Arizona, so my neighbor Brian Polito has had me write some stuff off and on for him. I've stayed busy. Probably could have been busier, but I've enjoyed what I've done. And just after I got to DC, Wade and I were goofing around trying to come up with new ways of doing his book Secret Origins as an annual. And he was a fan of alternative history science fiction. So he had in his mind that he could do these sort of fake origins by taking the legend of Superman and putting it in a different setting. Eventually somebody did, Clark lands Cal lands in Russia and becomes Red Sun or whatever he was.
Right.
But when we were talking about it, Mark's like, he lands in Russia and becomes a communist Superman, or as he would joke later, Batman and the Peloponnesian War, things like that. So he was, but I'm not sure what the stories can be. So like the next morning I pitched him Gotham by Gaslight, and it was just going to be an annual. But Dick Giordano, forever his name be praised, who was our boss, looked at it and he said, if you can get the right artist on it, we need to make this something different and special. Back then they were doing all these different formats. And they had this, what they were then calling prestige format, which was cardstock covers and square bound and whatever. But we had to have the right artist to be special enough. And it literally, like Lenny and Squiggy, Mike Mignola walked in at that moment, said, hello, Levine.
Sorry, I'm waiting for Laverne and Shirley to come in.
Hello, Levine. And, he was too busy to do it. But he said he'd listen to the pitch. And by the end of the pitch, he was pitching in. And then he suddenly said, oh,
right.
Damn, I'm doing this, aren't I? And sure enough, he did. So he and I collaborated on what it should be. I wrote the script. He drew a beautiful, beautiful book. And, the rest would, I guess, be history. Sold a lot, bought me a Jeep. It did very well. And, I guess it's the, the centerpiece of my resume. That and everything else. But that's the thing I'm probably, best known for. The book has never, as far as I know, gone out of print. And now it's a movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's gotta be cool, right? Just to actually get that far down the line, and like I said, that's one of the movies we were most excited about, the possibility of them making that into a film, just because it's off the beaten path. It kind of started the whole Elseworlds thing, right? It was Elseworlds before Elseworlds even existed.
If we created
right?
Elseworlds, we did it by accident. But I think that, for a reason, alternative history stuff, has a real appeal. Especially if you're taking, in fiction, you take a historical event and you recast something. The South wins the Civil War or whatever. In the comics, because these characters are so entrenched and we know them inside and out, what can you do to recast their stories? Well, I mean, we tripped over it. And I think writers looked and said, oh, we can do that. And, the various editors, Dick Giordano and Denny O'Neil and Mike Carlin, who were editing Batman and Superman respectively, were swamped suddenly with all of those, Batman in the Civil War, I think called Blue and Gray. We've talked about Red Sun and a whole bunch of others.
Yeah.
There was a pirate one drawn beautifully, I think, by Alan Weiss, if I remember. And, Max Allan Collins, a great mystery writer, did, and also the writer for many years of the Dick Tracy comic strip, did, Batman versus Al Capone. So, I mean, a lot of these stories came out and a lot of them were great and a lot of them were, are we still milking that skinny cow? But, Batman and the Peloponnesian War, as Mark would say. But, we accidentally started a ball rolling. It was Denny O'Neil, by the way, who named Elseworlds, and wrote that little paragraph that ran on every one, in Elseworlds, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I mean, it was something. I got to do a sequel. Now, Mark Waid was the editor of the first one, but Mark had moved on to freelance at that point, and Denny O'Neil, one of my idols, became my editor, and that was intimidating, but we wrote the sequel. I wrote the sequel. Denny actually approved of it and I think smiled once or twice and, stopped scaring me, for a while and, or intimidating maybe. I don't know. He's one of the greats and again, one of my heroes. But he edited it. We did, Batman Master of the Future, as a sequel, and that took off as well. So, here we are 30 years later after the first book. I think we're about to be 30 years. And I said to Mike Mignola not long ago, I'm glad they're doing it before the two of us shuffle off, So, but yeah, I mean, I sensed it because we were hearing some of the same vibrations about what do they call that? Is that DC direct? Not direct, but whatever the direct to
direct to video.
The home video. They were doing a lot of those, and it seemed that the ones they started with, I don't know, but they started with Killing Joke. They did Batman Year One and all that, and I thought pretty much we're probably in there because most of those that they were doing are of the same vintage. And then they let me know and then invited me to do absolutely nothing.
How do you get word from DC or whoever's doing the animated? Like, how far in advance do you get notice? Like, we're going to be doing this. Do they have to get approval for you script wise? Because I know that there are some parts that they kind of changed a little bit to kind of make the story flow.
They
adapted. Yeah.
When did they tell me? I don't know, about a year ago, I guess. They were just simply announcing, hey, by the way. So I got like an email from, whoever's in charge, of that. And I don't recall who it was, but I got an email saying, thought you'd enjoy knowing that we're making a film, an animated film. And I did, Bruce Timm's name was attached, as he is to, I think he's the guy that they go to for producing all of these or executive producing. And I thought, well, I'm in decent hands, and I had no ability to approve anything. They own Batman, and that thus, has always been the case. I didn't expect to be, invited to participate because, the DC Hollywood is doing whatever they're doing. So all I could do was wait and look forward. And then, I guess it was in October, November, right at the time that they wrapped the film. They sent me, it was edited. I think there was no music attached yet, but I got to see the whole film. And, I got to be honest, they had me at big letters on the screen that said, based on a story by, and, or a graphic novel written by Brian Augustyn and art by Mike Mignola. So my name is on the screen big and white. And frankly, after that, I didn't care much what they did with the story. I also went into it knowing, knowing friends who've had novels and whatnot adapted to film, that adaptation means they're making a film version of your idea, but the needs of cinema are considerably different than a comic book. Right. And among them being that my story is 40, maybe 48 pages, and they had roughly an hour and a half to fill. And, I knew they would have to do something. I was pleased to see that the sequel, contributed to some of the background and extension. The World's Fair bit, is out of, Master of the Future. A couple of the characters like Mayor Tolliver, et cetera, who shows up looking and sounding and everything exactly as he was created by me. And I think the essence of the story is there. The menace is there. In the process of making it more personal, they did other things to extend the story. And it, like I say, I went in expecting adaptation means things will change, but I think in the long run, the centerpiece of my graphic novel is the centerpiece of the film. The essential menace is the same. So I'm very happy. I thought it looked great.
So, Master of the Future, was that an idea that came about because of the success of Gotham by Gaslight, or was that a story that you had, kind of had in your head for a while?
After the success of the first one and the sort of that slow build to avalanche of all the other Elseworlds, Denny actually said, "This is doing well. We should do a sequel." So he asked me to pitch something, and that's what I came up with. Partly what I was thinking was to play a different genre. So the first one is very much a psychological mystery or horror story, if you will, with a serial killer, blah, blah, a thriller. And for the second one, I thought in period, a sort of Jules Verne-esque Victorian science fiction would be interesting. And coming from Chicago, the same year that we set that in 1894. No, that's not right. 1892 was the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. So I said, well, Gotham has something similar. So there is a World's Fair. There is a mystery of sorts, but a big, colorful, loudmouth villain, which we did not have in the first, and a Batman who I thought an interesting thing to think about for that sequel was he accomplished his original mission there. In the first one, he found his parents' killers. What more to do? Right. And so when that story picks up a couple of years later, he's like, well, I'm done. I'm retired. And so he had to sort of grow up a step, go from, vengeance driven to the civic hero, the hero of the people who would protect his city. So there's a transition and I think a growth leap. Now, very little of that got into the film, but the World's Fair got there, and I think all of that was rolled together rather nicely.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm always been fascinated by, adapting stories from one medium to another, and that's completely true. I guess a lot of times I've seen other films try to adapt stories exactly as they were to another medium, like from a comic book to a film, and a lot of times they don't work quite as well, just because film does have different requirements. Either its length or the way the story needs to work or pacing or whatever. But it's good to hear that they've captured the essence of the story.
Yeah, I don't want to make that sound like it's a minimal thing.
No,
I mean, very much of my story is there. I'm very content. The extension or the add-on material very often was, as I say, either drawn from the ideas of the story or drawn from the sequel for background material, or as to the way it all played out, the ending, they created a different surprise. They had to make it longer. They decided to make it more, they gave it a larger cast, so they managed to make it, work. And, as I say, in the end, it was Batman versus Jack the Ripper. And, I don't think it's too small a feat to suggest that they, missed everything but that, but they did the story justice. I mean, go ahead.
That's awesome.
No.
Go ahead. Oh, one thing, I mean, I just reread Gotham by Gaslight recently in preparation for this. And one thing that really surprised me is, to me, it's almost like the setting, the steampunk, period setting is almost just a backdrop for the story, and the story never gets in the way of the story, which I thought was very interesting. It uses the setting to its advantage, but it's not like it's ever really the star of the show. Like the characters and what happens is always at the forefront. And I thought that was very interesting. I was wondering if that was a conscious thing,
I guess,
on your part or not.
Even before we knew what Elseworlds was, in developing and thinking about the story with Mark and Mike, I think we were looking to say that Batman is Batman no matter where and when. So among the goals we had was to tell a story in an interesting setting, allow that setting to, well, not just be backdrop, but to, what could he do? What of Batman do we know that wouldn't exist? So there's no Batmobile. There's no, he doesn't have a lot of real gimmicks. He has, his utility belt is stuff that would exist and is a little clunkier. Mike Mignola gave a lot of thought to what the costume could be made of in that period. So it informed what we were doing. And the costume, by the way, I should tell you, the chest part is a dueler's chest protector, and he's got cavalry boots. This is Mike's depth. He thought about it. And
right.
Like I say, so did we to inform it. There's no Batmobile. We do get a great horse chase, which Mike wanted, and I thought perfect. But by and large, what we wanted to say was Batman is Batman is Batman. And so the period is not incidental. It is important. But as you say, I think more than anything, the idea was that it informed things, but it didn't intrude, and where it could be part of the story or part of the texture, it was there for us. I will, you mentioned steampunk, and a quick aside. Steampunk didn't exist at that time. And steampunk really grew out of that alternative science fiction that we've been talking about. And it caught on probably, mid-late 90s or something. But I discovered a handful, probably 10 years ago at conventions, Gotham by Gaslight was a big deal to steampunk folks. There was nothing steampunk in the book.
I know. I think the sequel contributes to that a little bit more, I'd say. And it is just like Elseworlds. It's one of those retroactive things where it has things in it that appeal to that whole. Yeah,
I've got a robot in the second one, but it's just clockwork. It's based on real sort of showbiz gimmick, machines, that could deal cards, or these were actually built in the Victorian era. They could seemingly play a musical instrument. So the look of that one is actually based on one of the most famous, called Antonio, I don't remember, Diavolo. And I think we stole the name and the look completely, but it's based on something that was really possible. But you're right. I think that lends an air.
Something I wanted to ask, as much as we were saying that the story kind of doesn't get in the way of itself as far as the setting, I also feel very much that Jack the Ripper's presence is very noticeable in there. And just kind of reading it, just in preparation for today, I remember seeing a documentary a few years ago about Jack the Ripper, and I remember these, events, just from the documentary. How much prep work of Jack the Ripper did you have to go into to kind of incorporate and weave that into the story?
Well, I think I did. At that point, it would have been library trip to read books and look for magazines or videos. I already knew quite a bit of it. I'm a bit of as a mystery reader. As a mystery reader, I was already very familiar with that, great unsolved mystery. Excuse me. And so I knew a lot of it. I had recently seen a documentary on public TV or something about it, so I knew the Duke of Clarence and a lot of the other subterfuge of the story came from the historical Ripper investigations. Mike also seemed to be a bit of an aficionado of that sort of historical mysteries. And between us, got a, I don't know, I guess a grasp of it. One of the things we didn't want to do to keep it from intruding is, very often when you see these sort of, a lot of it on television and film, when they are envisioning a different period, they go out of their way to set that scene. Even though the bit that they do has nothing to do with the story. Think about Chinatown. As great as Chinatown is, I will be forever bothered by the scene where he's reading a newspaper and the headline is King abdicates, and it's the whole, I can't even that King, Prince Edward and his American girlfriend. And I mean, that's a famous, so it's like, hey, it's 1937. Okay. When
that's exactly what I was getting at. Like,
they have to sort of
happen. Yeah.
Line up with things. I mean, my sense of it is if it's 1937, put a little title on the screen that says 1937, or find some other than obvious way. Not everything. I think it becomes somewhat, it takes you out of the story when you're sort of hit over the head with, this is happening at exactly the same time as this famous thing. Well, with Jack the Ripper, you're kind of stuck with that being the setting and the time frame. But, I mean, I'm not sure we should have, I like that we opened with Freud and there was an allusion to Sherlock Holmes, but I think maybe in retrospect, some of that might have been a little heavy handed. Although again, I do like what it tells us about Bruce, in the interview with Freud.
Yeah, I like the opening and I like the Freud stuff. And the thing that I thought was really cool is that the story infers so much more that you don't see that's explicit. Like Bruce is obviously been traveling. He's traveled the world. He's coming back to Gotham. And it ends up being Batman's origin story wrapped up into this at the same time. And I think that's a really cool approach.
Well, again, that's so much of that story, less so in 87. But so much of the Batman origin is known. I mean, now people who have never read a comic book know Batman's origin from the various films. We've gotten to that place where I think you don't need to repeat that every time. And certainly for us, it worked that we could hint and suggest. Some of that, Bruce traveled the world and learned and trained, had recently been reestablished in the real-time stories. So, in fact, before this, Mark and I had co-written a detective annual that featured one of Bruce's earliest studying as a detective and one of his first mentors. So we had already become very familiar ourselves with the origin. So yeah, we just wove that in rather than stopping to overdo it, because we did recognize that we had 48 pages and we knew we could rely on most of the readers to fill in those blanks. And thank you for filling in those blanks.
Yeah. And you're talking about things being understated and things like that. And, the Mignola art is wonderful. The story's got this great setup. Can you speak a little bit about the coloring from David Hornung? It's really interesting to me because I'm not sure how much other comic stuff he's done, and maybe I'm ignorant about this, but in college, I was in my color theory class, and we had this book about color theory. We were, painting with gouache paints and comparing and contrasting colors and stuff. And then I noticed the name of the person that did the book we were using was David Hornung, and I thought that is really familiar. And so I picked up Gotham by Gaslight when I came home, and of course it was the same guy, and I thought that was really interesting. So I brought it into class, and we got to analyze it, and read Batman in class, which was great, and just look at the colors and make and try to study it and see complementary colors and look at the palettes that were used. And And it's pretty cool, just how muted some of the things are, and just how it kind of
in this day of everything digital and no one touches paint. I'm not sure where Dave Horning came from, except that Mignola was familiar. Maybe he had worked with him. I don't think so, but he was a fan, and the guy had done some graphic novel work somewhere. And I'm sorry I can't fill that in. I can tell you that Mike chose him and then worked very hard with him to create the look. What we were doing at that time very often with covers or the higher end artwork was they did what they called then a blue line, and it was a artboard with everything that would be black in a non-photo blue, and then the artist would mostly watercolor. What Horning did, and this would become the backdrop. What Horning did was he painted in gouache, and he would tint or whatever he would create shadow versions of the colors. But he and Mike developed a very limited palette. So if you go through there, you'll see that everything is sort of like a smoky blue, a color very often that's somewhere between taupe and gray, and all of it grayed down. All of it. If we had thrown a daytime scene, Dave Horning probably would have exploded, because Mike wasn't going to draw anything that wasn't steeped in shadow anyway. But it was, in a sense, an experiment that I thought was perfect for the book. I have no idea what Dave Horning went on to do other than to write the book. But I think he was primarily a fine artist, and
yeah, exactly.
He was just plucked at the right moment by Mignola to add exactly the right color. And again, I wish I had more background, but
yeah, no, that's great, because I figured it was watercolor paints, gouache paints, because that's exactly what, like I said, we were studying in college through his book. So to see that replicated in a Batman story,
the artboards were
great.
This was flat color; they were opaque. That's gouache, right? Most every one of those kinds of artboards that we had seen would have been the transparent watercolor or watercolor dye. And when these came in, and they go out to the artist as this light blue printed board, and overlaid the black is as it was an acetate sheet with a black print, so that you could make sure you're registering. So in come these pages, and they're this massive bloppy gray and blue, but you laid the acetate over it, doggone it, and it came together.
Right. So you got to see the pages as they were being crafted. You didn't just have to hand off the story and wait. You got to see the whole process.
Because I was still editing it,
for
or
this
just barely
book.
Started. I was in Mark and I shared an office, so I saw most everything he did. He edited. He saw this. And at that time, the two of us were, children, just in the door of our dream jobs, and we were giddy about everything. And in comes this thing that was about to blow up. And, I don't know that we knew we had a hit on our hands, but we definitely were giggling fanboys when the pages came in. Mignola, although he was just getting going at the time, he had just finished Cosmic Odyssey, I think, and was about to do his Wolverine graphic novel that we delayed. And so he was about to be enormous. And I think even Mike has said that Gaslight was the thing that launched, not Mike, but it launched what became his career. The moody, the dark, he'll tell you he never wanted to draw superheroes. And He recognized that he was making his bones. I think he had done like a Rocket Raccoon at Marvel, but everyone knew he was going to be huge, and we were lucky. And so those pages came in, and we couldn't wait. And then the color pages came in. And again, even though we knew everything, we thought we knew everything about comic production. When those Harding pages came in, they were astounding and beautiful and so not traditional that it was perfect.
One question I have for you, that the Gotham by Gaslight, almost saw the light of day as a video game. There was some early test footage done, and I think that eventually kind of fell by the wayside. But I'm a big action figure collector myself, and I'm staring at a Elseworlds Gotham by Gaslight Batman action figure. What did you think when Gotham by Gaslight, before the animated movie, kind of took on some other forms? Like it almost made a video game, although I think the Arkham video games and the Arkham Origins did have a skin that you could dress Batman up as the Gotham by Gaslight Batman. But when you did you ever see like the Gotham by Gaslight action figure yourself? And we're like, oh wow,
I have one in the other room somewhere.
But what does something like that do for you to see? It's probably one thing to write and have it printed, but now to have a physical representation of that, I just kind of wondered what your thoughts on seeing something like that turned into.
Well, to be absolutely honest, everything that I've done in the business, in this, having grown up as a steeped in pulp paper comic junkie, it's hard not to constantly find myself back, in that frame of mind. So when this stuff happens, I never could have envisioned it. First off, when I was growing up, there were no action figures outside of, Captain Action or G.I. Joe. But, that kind of mass produced stuff, that was just not heard of. The same with everything. So, practically everything I've done has given me that sort of fanboy thrill. And, I don't think it was authorized, but there was a cast, porcelain statue, that was done probably 20 years ago, Anyway, somewhere in there. And I believe it was like one of these garage productions. It was not a licensed product, but it was, and I think I have it again. It's boxed up somewhere, but, it is a perfect representation. They've given a slightly more real anatomy proportions. Mike's stuff is, is beautifully odd. But it's a Mignola pose. It's the costume, and he's posed on a chimney because it was a Mike Mignola character. And it was gorgeous. There is the action figure, which I own. Actually, I own probably several because people give them to me as if I've never seen them. And I'm glad to accept them. That's fine. But I saw the test footage, 4 years ago?
Yeah, something like that.
And I've seen stills from the Arkham skin, and I thought they were okay. They were, again, I think they misunderstand the design, the trial footage or test footage. He was kind of clunky. And as I remember, all it is you're looking over his shoulder as he sort of marches through.
Right.
It was all gray,
urban
early
landscape. And the Arkham stuff was a little better, and it was cool. I'm not sure. As I say, all I know is when I see that kind of stuff, I kind of get a little giddy. There was a Brave and the Bold, animated on TV that was almost, I think it actually was the Gaslight Batman, and Sherlock Holmes, and the the demon. And I thought that was about as close to heaven as I was going to get. But now we have this, and I remain absolutely stratospherically happy.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. I guess the last question about Gaslight I have in my head before we move on to the next little segment I want to do is Gotham by Gaslight as a title. It's such a good title, and it's not something you would just, I mean, I guess the traditional thinking would be just call it Batman title something. So who came up with the title Gotham by Gaslight? Did you come up with it? Or where exactly did it come from?
I think I did in concert with Wade. I wish I could remember specifically. We were thinking in terms of movie titles, and there are films with titles like London at Midnight and that sort of thing. And there's something by Gaslight. I don't remember what it is. Paris by Gaslight, something like that. And I think we just stole that because it fit. It was perfect. I mean, I wish I could give you exact, times and dates and exactly how it happened. But I think it was just process. We just did it. There's not a whole lot of great thinking that goes on if I'm anywhere near it. So, it popped into somebody's head, one of the two of us or both of us. And, there was a time when we shared a head and, or a brain anyway. And it came up. Everyone said, "Oh, that's perfect," and on to the next thing.
Cool. Well, I guess the next little segment I want to do is because this is Batman on Film podcast. I wanted to pick your brain a little bit and get your thoughts on the Batman films. Like, do you have a particular favorite Batman film or an particular iteration you like the best?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've
like that?
Never outgrown my fascination with the character. Well, I grew up, I would have been 10 or 11 when the Adam West show was first broadcast. And I remember initially having very mixed feeling about that. Until I realized that they were doing the comic books of the time exactly right. Mm-hmm. It's just those things shouldn't be, well, I shouldn't say shouldn't. You should not expect naturalism out of a comic book that's being translated exactly. Read some of those aloud at any point. Read even today's comics out loud. And
sure.
Well, it is in a way, because I mean, one thing about comics is you have to get a whole bunch done so that every word balloon has to be concise. And that's not going to wind up being natural. You're constantly going to be, saying something that is either exposition, explanation, or a reason to turn the page. And none of that is going to sound like real conversation. And that's cool. That's fine. It's an art that has to be conquered. I'm happy that I'm any good at that at all, but it's a distinct thing. You have to be concise, and that they were doing it with a wink, was obvious. That they were doing it, lovingly, I think is accurate to say. But I remember talking this up to my 6th or 7th grade classmates before it aired on TV, and they thought it was the stupidest thing in the ever, because they weren't comic fans, and there were a couple of bullies who wanted to beat me up because the show was so awful. I almost bled for Batman. I think my way out of that was simply to say, "You're going to beat me up over a TV show," and somehow I penetrated the Neanderthalic brain, and they did not beat me up, but they were no more happy. So for many years, that was Batman, and I later years looking at it in a rerun as an adult, and I love it even more because it's silly, because it's such a encapsulated thing. It's perfect. I was working at DC when the first film, the first Keaton film, the Tim Burton.
Yeah.
In fact, that film came out, I should say, summer of 89. No, I think that's when our book came out. So,
Yeah.
so we came out, they
It
were
is,
out
yeah.
in June or
Same
July.
here.
We came out at Halloween, which was on purpose for some reason. And, we came out just as the wave was about to crest of everything Batman is wonderful. So I'm not, I'm sure that some of our success was because of our own brilliance and Mike Mignola's art, but, everything Batman was doing very well, and we were lucky to be part of that. In fact, it took Mike and I to Hawaii with our wives. So we went to do signings and also get whacked on Mai Tais. But anyway, the people were happy to bring us out, and we went. DC was happy to pay most of the bills. It was a good time to be in the Batman business. I was initially not convinced that Michael Keaton, who I enjoyed in other things, was Batman, but having seen the film, what was it, the Christopher Reeve Superman? You'll believe a man can fly. In this instance, you'll believe an actor can really act a part. I mean, he was great. Thanks to everything but for that rubber costume. The man had to turn his entire body to look at something off to the side. I've found every Batman since that have the costumes slightly overthought. For many years, while I was at DC, we had boxed glass boxes of actual costumes on mannequins. So we had Keaton's first film Batman suit. We had the Catwoman suit from the second film. I enjoyed the Burton versions more or less, and I thought Keaton was great. Danny DeVito as the Penguin kind of made me a little queasy, which I believe was the point. The later iterations after Burton and Keaton were gone, not so much. In fact, not at all. I think if
most people would agree
Jar Jar
with
Binks had shown up, I would not have been surprised. That was like misunderstood camp. And what?
Yeah.
Right. It's tricky. Even the 60s show didn't get it right sometimes, and it shows you how hard
once they knew it, they
balancing
were doing
that
camp,
actually is.
Kind of the wheels came off a little bit. They started overdoing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
They would almost stop and hang up a sign going, "It's goofy, get it?" But Schumacher, who was a very nice man, was following and was told, make it more fun, because while the Burton vision is very dark, is very Charles Addams or whatever, and it worked very well, but they went elsewhere and with different actors, and a lot of strange choices were made. I am among the minority who didn't care for the Nolan Bale films. I thought they were too dark, too grim, a little too unrelentingly so. I thought the mistake there was they took Batman way too seriously. And frankly, Tom Hardy is a good actor, but you couldn't prove it by at least to me, you couldn't prove it by way that talking through a coffee can bit. there was first a weird accent, and then it was this echoey kind of muffled and strange. And I'm sure it was even recorded and messed with. So he wasn't literally muffled, although on set, I'm sure it didn't come off clearly. So there, again, weird choices being made that whole last film. Like I say, I'm one of the few people, in the world probably, who recognize the art, but did not find those to be fun. And they weren't fun, I guess. That wasn't the point, Brian. What I have seen of so far of Ben Affleck, I enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Have you seen Justice League?
So was that 2 films he's done?
Okay.
Batman v.
Yeah. And a cameo in Suicide Squad. Yeah.
That's true. That's right. I don't know. He seems right. I mean, and I also, Batman v Superman, which sounds like a court docket.
Right.
His Bruce is pretty cool. And I thought even more of his Bruce in, Justice League. So again, I'm always in the minority on this stuff, but, I've been enjoying him. In the first film, I thought they went a little too much Dark Knight Returns, but they've reeled it back. And, I don't think that Justice League or Batman versus Superman or even Man of Steel, were the cataclysmic cancers on film that a lot of people seem to think they are. Again, we go back to where I come from. Anytime I get to see a superhero on TV or film, I'm pretty happy just because I get to see something that we couldn't have thought of with all the, literally, it's almost nowadays as if it's not a superhero film, people aren't going to go see it. Or frankly, it's hard not to see a superhero film, but I've enjoyed them. I don't think DC is doing as badly with their films as, again, it just seems to be in vogue to hate them. So, yeah, I'm a contrarian, I guess. Anyway, that's where I'm at. I mean, I've enjoyed in some way all of what's happened, but each of those films has their highs and very much, some of them have lows.
Pluses and minuses. Yeah. And that's the thing is like a lot of us don't like certain films or like other films, but at the end of the day, I still like Batman. And it's just, and we wouldn't be complaining about things unless we love the character so much. And I think that's, to me, something I try to hold on to, even when I'm discussing things fervently with other people. If there's something I don't agree with.
The love of the form and the characters and a desire to see things perfect is understandable. Like I say, my perspective is I never thought I'd see this much stuff. And now I'm starting to sound like your grandfather, but I never thought I'd see jet plane.
Yeah,
oh,
even me as a kid. Just what we have now.
I'm just, I grew up loving this stuff. And again, we fall back to the idea that adaptation is a specific thing. And I feel lucky just to see what we see. And that's it. That's me. I love it. So therefore, what I see, other people love it and desire or wish for better or more or less or whatever. But we're all of it in love with comic books or Batman or however you want to break it down.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was just going to
say, Rob?
You were talking about the Keaton films. I was a freshman in high school, and even though I had been collecting Batman comics here or there, the notion of seeing Batman on the screen, I had no idea what to expect. So kind of after that, you falling down the rabbit hole. Gotham by Gaslight was one of the first, things I had bought, and then started my love affair of, DC and everything. So sitting in a theater today and seeing something like Justice League, the kid me back in the 80s, I couldn't have dreamed of all the different things that we could possibly see. So I'm very much in the same line with you. Very grateful that we're getting to see some versions of these characters. Some work, some don't work. But at the end of the day, Batman's still on the screen, and that kid goes, "Wow, I can't believe it's all here."
Right, and frankly, most of us wouldn't care about this as adults unless that kid was still pretty close to the surface. Can I ask you guys a question?
Go for it.
Have you seen the
of course.
adaptation, the film, Gotham by Gaslight?
I think we all.
No,
I
was always one of those. Yeah.
Has anyone seen it?
No.
None of us three have seen it. I think we're all waiting. We were all waiting kind of for this, and then we were waiting for the physical release.
I am not horribly offended.
Couple more weeks.
I'm not. I'm not unoffended though. Yeah. What has it just been? It's.
We're all going to get it. Though.
Glad to hear it. It probably adds not one dime, but to me. But I'm glad you brought.
Well, we hope it.
I was going to say is, well, I hope you enjoy it. It's been digitally released, right? You can buy it online.
Yes,
it's out. Right, it's out digital. The physical release is not until February the 6th. And I was talking to these guys before the show. It's actually also being released in 4K Blu-ray. So that's for some reason enticing me
what does that
to
even
try
mean?
it to see it in that format too. It's the resolution is about 4 times greater than a normal Blu-ray, and it has HDR, high dynamic range with the colors. So the color palette is more than you would have in a normal Blu-ray.
I have a Blu-ray that's only about a year old. I hope it'll play that then. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean the good thing is, all those packs come with a 4K Blu-ray, a regular
I thought
Blu-ray,
you meant a different package
too. So no matter.
Oh, that's interesting. Well,
a package that I'm very much interested. I was telling these guys before you would come on is Best Buy. Lately with the DC properties, they've been taking the graphic novel and they've been shrinking it down into the size of a DVD so it fits in the case.
Really?
And I had loaned my original copy of Gotham by Gaslight to a friend in high school. My mom quickly told me, "You probably will never see that book again," because he moved away a couple weeks later. So my original copy is gone. So when this comes out on Blu-ray, I'm going to get a miniature version of the comic book. So that instantly had me, wanting to grab it just because I love the material so much. So I thought I'm just going to wait for digital because I want to get a hold of the book again to have in my possession.
Well,
so I don't even know if you were aware that they were taking your comic and shrinking it down inside.
No, I did not. It's like getting. They used to get comics sometimes packaged in it with cereal boxes, and probably about the same size you're talking about if it's in ratio.
Yeah, it's gonna be about that size.
Now you understand that the book is available.
Yes.
Frankly, since about 2009, it's been available as a twofer. It's got both stories in the book.
Yeah.
Right. I actually just bought it. I own both books, physical copies, but I bought the digital version a couple of days ago just for this, so I could read it on the go or on my phone.
Oh, you kids today
with the guided view. I know. I usually don't do the digital comics, but we've got a new baby this year. She just turned 6 months, and it's kind of one of those things where I don't always have the time to sit down and open a comic book. So when I'm in the middle of things, I can pop up my phone and read even a few panels of a comic book.
No criticism intended. I have Comixology on my tablet, so we're in the same place.
Yeah,
I like I say, I did not know they were going to do an impact. That's kind of cool. I mean, it's also strange to consider all of that kind of shrunk down, but I'll see what I see. Best Buy would be a place to shop. Hopefully they'll send me something. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. And And that's the yeah. And after we all see the movie, we're obviously going to do another episode show where we talk about the movie.
I would
itself.
like to announce that on the DVD extras is my face. No, it's me.
Oh, nice.
I'm extended. There's an extended interview that's included. I was brought out to Burbank, November, something like that. And we did about an hour's worth of interview on, I was going to say on film, but digitally anyway. And, I have a face made for podcasts, but, there I am. There I am. And, I enjoyed it and I appreciated the invitation. I thought that was kind of cool. The writer, you've seen the cliches over the years that the writer is usually the guy in the back holding the bucket or whatever, or, trying to fight his way into the set. But, they invited me out and initially I was going to be part of the commentary track with Bruce Timm.
Oh, wow.
But, scheduling changed and they decided, we flew him out here once. Our extras budget isn't that big, so they were going to try to do it in 2 days, and they would have put me up. But then Tim was out of town, and they had to reschedule the interviews, and I didn't even get to meet the guy. So, oh wait, I'm starting to get angry about this. No, no. Like I say, I enjoyed being invited, and feeling like I was a part of it. So that's kind of cool. Well, I guess it would be nowhere if we hadn't done the original story, but I mean, part of the DVD
That's
thing.
True. Yeah. One of my and that's the thing is like, I wish you could have done that commentary. One of my favorite things, commentary wise, is a few years ago, they did that, Batman Gotham Knights, where it was anime segments of Batman related to Batman Begins. And the thing that I liked more than the actual film was the commentary track on that, because it's Kevin Conroy, Gregory Novak, and Dennis O'Neil talking to each other for like an hour and a half about Batman, and it's just the most magnificent thing ever. And I watched that sometimes.
I'll have
just
to look for that
commentary.
because I've never seen those except on television somehow. Maybe I was watching it at someone's house, but I've seen some of that anyway. But not the commentary. I'm afraid I probably would have gone stupid if I had done it. Or I might have gotten, the screenwriter was also part of the commentary track. I might have at some point, gotten angry at him for changes or something. But like I say, I'm ecstatic about the film. But I would have loved that. And I don't know, I'm not bad off the cuff, so I would have been interrupting the movie, but oh, here's a story. Yeah, I know.
Well, that's what a commentary is for.
You just talked over the solution. Oh, nuts. Now, if you're listening to the commentary track, you watch the film first, right? And then you rewatch it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I listen to commentaries. Sometimes people will say, like, you better not be watching this first, but I've never known anybody that's watched a commentary before actually watching the film.
Anyway, there will be an interview along with other extras that I actually don't know much about. Although Tim and the screenwriter and maybe the director are on the commentary track, so that'll still be cool.
That's usually one of the first things I do and getting a DVD is before I end up watching the movie, I go through all of the extras and the interviews. So that's a pleasant surprise to hear that you'll be part of the interview bonus segment, which is another reason why I buy the physical copies, because usually digital, all you get is just the digital film, and you usually miss all of the extras.
Right. Well, as I say, I'm really looking forward to it as well. I've seen the final cut. But I'm looking forward to seeing it in its total package with the music, with all of those, whatever extras turn.
Oh,
out.
yeah.
So it's, it's a kid on Christmas Eve. I definitely have that feeling.
Awesome. Well, I guess this is kind of out of order, but the last little thing I want to ask is when you were an editor, you edited Justice League Task Force, and that book tied into one of our favorite stories, Nightfall. I think there was 2 issues that tied into Nightfall, and you talked about Dennis O'Neil and stuff like that. So I was just wondering if you had any stories from around that time, editing that book or being involved in that in some way that you still remember.
Well, they had asked me to extend the title. There were a couple of, Justice League. There were a couple of, it came with attachments. The previous and very successful Justice League had been the Giffen DeMatteis sort of humorous or wacky or whatever it was. It was a lot of fun, but they recognized that by the time those guys were stepping down, and the guys were stepping down for probably the same reason, they recognized that they'd kind of played that hand. And so when I was asked to take the book, I was asked with this sort of, like I said, a short list of commands, I guess. Let's make it traditional again. And if you make it traditional, we guarantee you can have Superman and Batman. I mean, they would not have lent those characters much. I think Batman was in the Giffen version, but Superman was forbidden to the Justice League editors because for whatever reason. But I was told I could have the classic characters. I think I may even have been editing Wonder Woman at the time, so that wouldn't have been an issue. But they wanted it to be more of a classic version, and that was, like I say, that was a command 1. And another of the commands was find ways to extend the idea. So we had 2 books, Justice League America, Justice League International, or Europe, or whatever it was originally called. And I kind of invented the concept of Task Force because I wanted to do superhero Mission Impossible. And that's what we did. With Martian Manhunter as Mr. Phelps. And so we did. You're sitting there going, what's he talking about? Mission Impossible? What's that? Tom Cruise is Mission Impossible. Anyway.
Oh, the classic.
The TV show.
Yeah.
You assemble the team. Now, I know that we participated in Nightfall. I wish I could tell you some great stories about that. But by and large, my associate editor was running that book. I had a fairly big, and then he pauses, and it sounds like I'm about to brag. We had a workload, and I had 2 assistants, which again, I'm not bragging. We just were willing to take on that many books. And so Ruben Diaz, at that point, had been an assistant, then promoted to associate. And he ran that book after about the 10th issue. But, I had to oversee the crossover, so I know we did it. I know what the plotting was. I don't remember if we had, I think we had invited Denny to write it, but I don't know if he did. I don't remember that. But, Denny was just up and coming, and I thought I'd give him a boost. But yeah. I'm sorry, I can't tell you any real anecdotes. Like I say, I don't remember who wrote the book.
Oh, that's okay.
Or drew the book. Gosh, I wish I had a memory, but that's, a couple hundred comic books ago.
Actually, sure. I was just pulling it up on my database that the Justice League Task Force issues 5 and 6 were written by Denny O'Neil.
Yeah, so he did do it. That was my memory. Yeah.
Oh,
because we were doing a whole rotating. I mean, I think we had the same artist for quite a while, but Sal Valuto, my pal Sal, and but we did try. We had David Michelini did the premiere, and I think we had Peter David do some issues. Denny did some issues.
Yeah. And I was telling these guys before the show, there was this. I was looking at the physical issues of the Nightfall crossovers, and you and Brian, I believe you were answering. You still were answering the questions in the letters columns, in the backs of the books. Yeah, and there was one example. It was the strangest thing. And somebody asked you a question, and you talked about like, well, I'm sitting here in 1994 or whatever it was, and 25 years from now, it'll be this date and this year, and hopefully my daughter will or won't be married or something like that. And I was looking at the page, and I said to myself, "Oh my gosh, it's like exactly the date that he said it would be." So I hopped on. Yeah, it was super strange. So I hopped on Twitter, and I had just seen that you had rejoined Twitter, and I sent you a screenshot of that, and I'm like, "Hey, look, you said it." You said
I
this
remember
20 years
this now.
ago,
okay,
and I sent you that.
Yeah, neither of my daughters is married yet, but they are adults, and I'm proud of both of them. But so at that one time I wrote that, the second daughter was just about to be born. I wonder if I predicted anything else that did happen. I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know. We'd have to go back and look. Still waiting for that Gotham by Gaslight.
It's never going to happen.
Right, I will be thinking how much I enjoyed George Clooney's performance as Gaslight Batman.
Can't wait for that
in the full-length feature film.
Well, it was great having you on the show today, Brian. We really enjoyed talking about Batman, Gotham by Gaslight, your whole career. It was great. Do you have anything you'd like to plug or promote?
Well, I'm
before we end the show.
Joe Benitez, artist who's been doing all kinds of stuff from DC, Marvel, but for the last 6, 7, 8 years, he's been doing his own book called Lady Mechanica, which is a steampunk, part robot, part human lady detective in the sort of mythical Victorian era. And he and I have known each other for years. And one day we were both at a convention, and he looked at me and said, "You wrote Gotham by Gaslight." And I said, "Did I?" No. And I said, "Yes." And here's that kind of unintentional credit that we get for steampunk. He said, you made steampunk possible." And I said, "Well, I hope not." But no, I said, "Well, I don't know about that, but we certainly worked in the same era." And he goes, "You should write some stuff for us." So right now I'm in the middle of an arc for him, doing 3, I think, issues of Lady Mechanica. He's I don't know if you're familiar with the book at all, but he did a straight run, and now he's doing story arcs, each of them renumbered, so that they're graphic novels. They're standalone 3-parters or 4-parters. And I'm doing this one, and we are winking heavily at Gotham by Gaslight, so there will be Easter eggs and things like that. There's even a dark creature of the night hero introduced. So I'm doing that, doing other things, writing some prose, sort of new pulp, none of which is close to publication. And I do a weekly podcast myself called Sort of a Big Show. And that's everything I'd want to plug.
Yeah, and I was going to ask, where can we
right
find
now
that podcast?
It's on SoundCloud.
Is it on iTunes or?
Because my producer has a SoundCloud for his music, but we keep trying to get on iTunes. We're working on it, but it's been around for quite a while. In fact, I started that 2 years ago, I think, maybe. Well, whatever. My daughter, the older daughter, who is the geek bred true to some degree, what we did is we talked about everything, pop culture, comics, movies, whatever. That's what we still do. But she was my initial co-host. And that was great. A dad and daughter podcast about comic books and things like that.
That's great.
So
Yeah.
Anyway, it's still around right now. It's just two guys talking. And we need more of those kinds of podcasts.
And is that one, do you record that one with the
did.
audience?
I did a live action
Is that just
video cast,
Okay.
like a talk show out of a comic shop quite a while ago. So yeah, I've done a lot of I've done a lot of the media stuff. Sure.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So I guess, thanks
My
again
pleasure,
for coming on the
anytime.
show. It was great. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to shoot you off email and let you know what we thought about the movie after we see it, and it's still in a couple weeks away for us. So
please do.
So
And,
it's exciting.
let me remind you, it's an adaptation, but it's a really good film. So there's
That's good.
two prongs, which
That's good to hear. And it's also good to hear that the creator of the original source material does enjoy the product that they produced. So that makes me feel very good.
well, I was anxious and also a little concerned going in, but yeah, I am very happy. One of the first things that made me wonder was the first casting was announced and someone said to me, "What do you think about this actress playing Catwoman in your movie?" And I went, "What? Catwoman?" And then I just told myself, "Adaptation, pal, relax." But I think the characterization is terrific, and I think everyone will enjoy it.
Very cool.
What do you got to plug, Rob?
Well, of course, Rob and Everyone Loves the Drake. We're at ELTD Podcast on Twitter. We just finished up, sadly without you, Ryan, we finished up a Troika, breaking up into 2 parts. And then I've got a special project kind of in the mix, kind of has to do with the lonely place of living. But I think if I can get all the pieces worked out, we're trying to shoot for a spring release on that. So there'll be more information. You can find out more about that on Twitter at ELTD Podcast.
Awesome. And what do you got to plug, Matt? I know you have something.
I do have something. It's coming. The Agent of the Bat podcast. It is at Twitter at Azrael Podcast. And my personal Twitter is at MATTWHA13. And I believe that's it.
Awesome. For my own plugs, you can follow me, Ryan Haas, over on Twitter at SMB_Ryan. And I'm also part of the Tim Drake, Everyone Loves the Drake podcast that Rob already told you about. So that wraps up today's episode. Thanks again to our guest, Brian Augustyn, for joining us. And for Rob and Matt, I'm Ryan. Thank you for listening. And as always, Batman on Film, authoritative, definitive, dadgum original. We'll catch you next time.
Hey now! You've been listening to the Batman on Film podcast, a proud member and the sponsor of the Batman Podcast Network, batmanpodcastnetwork.com. You can listen to the BOF podcast on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, TuneIn, and wherever good podcasts like this one can be found. Want to advertise on the BOF podcast? Go to advertisecast.com/the Batman on Film Con podcast. Follow Jet on Twitter at Batman on Film and on BOF's Facebook fan page at facebook.com/jet.batmanonfilm. Email Jet via jet@batman-on-film.com. I'm announcer Rachel. Thanks for listening.